The notification came through at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I almost didn't see it. I was in the home office running a security audit on a client's network infrastructure when my secondary monitor flickered with a system alert. Our home router, the one I'd configured with enterprise-grade logging software because old habits die hard, had flagged an unusual pattern. My wife's phone had connected to an unfamiliar Wi-Fi network at 6:32 that evening. The network name was Proximity Suites Columbus. Not the office, not her sister's place across town. A hotel 4 miles from our house. I stared at the alert for a long time. My wife had told me she was working late. A product launch review that couldn't wait. I'd eaten dinner alone, watched half a documentary about deep-sea fish, and gone to bed without texting her because she'd asked me once, gently but clearly, not to check in during big work nights. She said it broke her focus. I had respected that. I closed the alert and went back to my client's network. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe the office Wi-Fi was down and she ducked into a hotel lobby to use their connection. Maybe she'd parked nearby and the signal had bled through. I'd spent 17 years in cybersecurity. I knew better than anyone that a single data point meant nothing without context. But I also knew better than most that sometimes a single data point is the thread that unravels everything. My name is Marcus, and I'm 41 years old. And I had believed until that Tuesday night that my marriage was solid. Not exciting in the way it had been when my wife and I met in our late 20s. She was finishing her MBA. I was 3 years into a cybersecurity firm I'd built from a spare bedroom, but solid, comfortable, built on something real. My wife handled brand strategy at a startup called Viridian. She joined 2 years earlier when they were pre-revenue and hungry, and she'd grown with them as they scaled. She worked long hours and came home charged up in a way that reminded me of my own early years. I was proud of her. I told her that. The CEO of Viridian was a man named Derek. She'd mentioned him the way you mention furniture, frequently enough that his name became part of the background noise of our household. Derek approved the new campaign. Derek pushed the launch date up. Derek thinks we should expand to the West Coast. I had pictured someone forgettable. I had never asked to meet him. I sat in my home office that Tuesday night for another 2 hours. Then I went to bed without mentioning the alert to my wife when she came home at midnight, smelling of a perfume that was hers but somehow more present than usual. Over the following week, I paid the kind of attention I usually reserved for hostile network intrusions. My wife had a habit of setting her phone face down on the kitchen counter when she got home, something she'd started doing about 4 months earlier. She'd told me she was trying to disconnect in the evenings. I had called it healthy at the time. Now I noticed that she always picked it up within seconds of it buzzing, and she always angled the screen away before reading the message. I noticed that she had started going to the gym on Wednesday mornings before work, something new, and that she came home from those Wednesday mornings with dry hair. I noticed that when I asked about Derek now, casually, the way you ask about furniture, her answers were slightly shorter than they used to be. Less detail, less color. As if she'd decided to leave him out of the room she shared with me. I did not confront her. I am not a confrontational person by nature, and more practically, I knew from years of professional experience that you never tip your hand before you understand the full scope of what you're dealing with. I went looking for information the way I knew how. Our home network logged everything, every device, every connection, every destination. I pulled 90 days of records and began cross-referencing. My wife's phone showed regular connections to a network called DVS Private, a network that didn't belong to Viridian's registered corporate infrastructure, which I confirmed through a quick lookup of their publicly filed IT disclosures. DVS. Derek Vane Strickland. His name was on the company's founding documents, which were a matter of public record. The connections happened on Tuesdays and Thursdays, consistently between the hours of 5 FRUs and 9 p.m. My wife had told me about a recurring leadership sync on Thursday evenings. She'd mentioned it once and I hadn't asked follow-up questions. I thought about that. I checked our shared credit card statements next. Nothing obviously wrong. She was careful, or someone had advised her to be careful. But I found something interesting in our joint savings account. Over 6 months, money had moved in small, irregular increments. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize, amounts between $200 and $800, never quite large enough to trigger any automatic notification threshold. Someone who understood financial monitoring would know exactly how to stay under that threshold. My wife did not have that background, but I knew someone who might have guided her. I pulled Derek Strickland's professional history from public sources: LinkedIn, court records, business filings. He was 38, twice divorced, and had been a named party in a civil fraud complaint in Arizona 3 years earlier, a dispute with former business partners that had been settled out of court. The settlement terms were confidential, but the original complaint described a pattern of financial manipulation that was creative and methodical. My wife had told me he was brilliant. She wasn't wrong. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I do for a living, except this time, the network I was mapping was my own life. I created a secondary log on our router that captured packet-level data rather than just connection metadata. I am not proud of everything I did during this period, but I am honest about it. When you have spent 2 decades protecting systems from people who want to exploit them, you learn that waiting for the threat to announce itself is how systems get compromised. I was protecting something. I told myself that. What I found in the traffic data confirmed what I had already begun to accept. My wife was communicating with Derek through an encrypted messaging app, the kind people use specifically because it doesn't leave a trail on standard carriers. The content of the messages was unreadable to me, but the frequency, the timing, the duration of sessions, those things told a story that only needed one interpretation. I also found something I hadn't expected. Derek was using a device registered to Veridian to access networks that had no legitimate business purpose. I recognized the pattern because I'd seen it before in corporate espionage cases. He was routing activity through the company's infrastructure to obscure personal transactions. It was clever work. It was also, unambiguously, a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I kept a spreadsheet. Old habit. The confirmation came on a Thursday in November. I'd arranged to be working from home that day. I told my wife the client meeting had been pushed, and when she left for her leadership sync, I waited 20 minutes and then drove the route her phone data suggested she took on Thursday evenings. Proximity Suites, Columbus. The same hotel from the router alert. I parked across the street and watched her walk through the lobby entrance with a man I had never seen in person but whose face I recognized from his company headshot. He had his hand on her back, low, proprietary. She was laughing at something he'd said. She looked young in a way she hadn't looked at home in a long time. I sat in my car for 37 minutes. I am not an emotional person in the way some people are, but I want to be honest about those 37 minutes. I had built something, a home, a life, a version of the future that I had genuinely believed in, and it was being taken from me by someone I had never considered a threat, because I had trusted my wife not to let threats through the door. I drove home, changed my clothes, and made dinner for 2. When she came home and said the sink had run long, I nodded and said I understood about long sinks. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I wanted wine. Sure, I said. I opened my laptop after she went to sleep. My son Noah is 19, away at college in Michigan, which meant most of this played out without him in the house. But he comes home on the second weekend of every month, and on one of those weekends he stopped by my office while I was working and leaned against the doorframe the way he's done since he was 12. Something's wrong, he said. It wasn't a question. Noah has my eyes, which means he has always been better at reading situations than he is at reading rooms. I looked at him for a moment. I'm dealing with some things, I said. With Mom? I didn't answer. He nodded once, like I had. She's been different, he said. Since the summer. I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't sure, but she's been different. Different how? He was quiet for a second, like she's waiting to be somewhere else. After he went to bed, I sat with that for a long time. My first move was quiet and clean. Derek's use of Veridian's infrastructure for personal financial activity was a specific and documentable violation. I had the traffic patterns, the routing signatures, the timestamps. I packaged the technical evidence into an anonymous report, the kind of filing that any credible cybersecurity professional would recognize as legitimate, and submitted it to Veridian's board of directors. I had obtained their individual email addresses through their professional profiles. I also sent a copy to the Ohio Department of Commerce's Division of Securities, along with a note suggesting they might want to cross-reference the company's most recent investor reporting with the network activity I'd documented. I did not sign my name to any of it. I didn't need to. The second move took more patience. Through the router logs and some careful reconstruction, I had pieced together enough of Derek's financial behavior to understand what he was doing with the money my wife had been transferring. He was consolidating funds from multiple sources, some of them women, I suspected, though I couldn't confirm, into a holding account that appeared legitimate on its face, but was structured in a way that would let him move the balance offshore if things got complicated. The account was tied to a Delaware LLC that Derek had incorporated under a variation of his middle name. I contacted a financial crimes investigator at the FBI field office in Columbus. I had done legitimate consulting work for federal clients before, and I knew the intake process. I filed a suspicious activity report through proper channels, attaching the financial trail I'd reconstructed. I noted the offshore structure and the LLC. I was careful and precise. I did not exaggerate. I did not need to. The third move was more personal. I had determined through publicly available records that Derek's second ex-wife, a woman named Patricia, had been awarded a civil judgment against him for non-payment of her property settlement. The judgment had never been fully collected because Derek had restructured his assets after the divorce in ways designed to make collection difficult. Patricia's attorney was on record with the court. I sent that attorney an anonymous envelope. Inside was a detailed map of Derek's current asset structure, the LLC, the holding account, the offshore routing, along with a note suggesting that the judgment might now be collectible if her client moved quickly. I included no return address. The fourth move was about my wife. I had discovered, through the network logs, that she had been using our shared computer on several occasions to research divorce attorneys and asset division laws in Ohio. She'd cleared the browser history each time, but she had not cleared the router's DNS records, which logged every domain queried by every device on our network. I know what I said earlier about not being proud of everything. This is one of the things I'm least proud of. But I also found that she had been documenting our joint assets in a shared folder in her cloud account, values, account numbers, access credentials, in a way that suggested she was preparing to hand that information to someone. A lawyer, perhaps, or Derek. I quietly changed the passwords on every financial account I had access to. I moved our joint savings to an account in my name only, leaving a nominal balance. I notated the transactions carefully, with dates and reasons for the eventual legal process. Then I put a litigation hold on our mortgage documents, which prevents unilateral sale or refinancing without both parties' signatures. When she tried to access the savings account 2 days later, I know because the bank sent a login notification to my email, which she had apparently forgotten I received. She found a balance that told her the game had changed. She didn't mention it to me. That silence was its own kind of confession. Things began to unravel for Derek on a schedule I had not fully anticipated, which made it strange to watch from a distance. The board investigation at Veridian happened faster than I expected. Within 3 weeks of my report, the company announced an independent review of financial governance practices in a press release that was clearly trying to be vague but managed only to be alarming. Derek stopped responding to my wife's messages. I could see the pattern in her behavior even if I couldn't read the content. And she became visibly agitated in the way someone becomes agitated when a structure they were depending on starts to crack. Patricia's attorney moved to enforce the judgment. A court freeze was placed on the Delaware LLC. The FBI inquiry I couldn't track directly, but I knew it was moving because Derek's name appeared in a business journal item about Veridian's review that cited questions raised by federal regulators about the company's financial practices. That kind of language doesn't appear by accident. I watched my wife go through her days with the careful composure of someone who was working very hard not to show what she was feeling. She laughed at dinner. She asked about Noah. She filled the silences in our house with the ordinary sounds of a marriage that still looked, from the outside, like it was intact. I wondered if she had any idea how good I had become at seeing through surfaces. On a Saturday morning in December, I asked her to sit down at the kitchen table. I placed a folder in front of her. Inside it was everything: the router logs, the hotel records, the savings transfer history, the DNS query records, the documentation of the financial preparation she'd been doing without my knowledge. I had organized her with the same precision I use for client security audits. She stared at the folder for a moment before opening it. When she did, she turns pages slowly and didn't speak. I watched her face move through expressions I recognized from 17 years. Surprise, the particular stillness she uses when she's recalibrating, and then something that looked less like guilt than like exhaustion. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since November. A router alert." She almost laughed. "A router alert? I'm good at my job." She closed the folder and pushed it to the center of the table, as if creating distance from it. "What do you want, Marcus?" It's a strange question to be asked by your wife. What do you want? As if the past 17 years hadn't already defined what I wanted. As if my wanting had somehow become negotiable. "I want you to understand what this is," I said. "All of it. Not just what you did, but how you did it. The transfers. The preparation. You weren't just having an affair. You were building a runway to leave, and you were using my money to build it." She didn't deny it. That cost her something. I could see that. But she didn't deny it. "I was unhappy," she said. "I know. I can see that now, looking back. What I don't understand is why you didn't say so." She was quiet. "The money," I said. "The transfers. Were those your idea or his?" She looked at the table. "That was its own answer." "He told you it would protect you during the divorce proceedings," I said. "It wasn't a guess. It was the only narrative that fit the data. Small amounts under the reporting threshold moved early enough to establish a pattern of independent savings. That's not something you'd know how to structure on your own. That's something someone taught you." Her jaw tightened slightly. "He told you he was going to leave his life and be with you," I said. "He was using you the same way he used the company infrastructure and Patricia and whoever came before you. You were a resource to him. A line item." "Don't," she said. "I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because I think some part of you already knows it. And I think you should hear it out loud before you make any decisions about what comes next." She looked at me for a long time. 17 years changes the quality of how two people look at each other. There was something in her eyes that might have been the beginning of grief. "What comes next," she said, "is that we're done." "Yes," I said. "We are." She left 2 days later to stay with her sister. I helped her carry bags to her car, as I imagine most men do in these moments, performing the courtesy of a partnership that has just officially ended. Noah drove down the following weekend. I sat with him in the living room and told him the truth, the same way I would have wanted someone to tell me. The financial records, the preparation, the 7 months of a parallel life being constructed without my knowledge. He listened with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor. When I finished, he was quiet for a while. "Did you handle it?" he asked. He didn't mean did I survive it. He meant something more specific. "I handled it," I said. He nodded, and that was most of what needed to be said between us. The months that followed were a kind of accounting. Rudian's board removed Derek from his role as CEO in January, citing the ongoing governance review. The official statement used the phrase mutual agreement, which is what corporations say when the alternative is a lawsuit. The federal inquiry expanded, and by spring, Derek had been formally named as the subject of investigation for wire fraud and securities violations. Patricia's attorney, moving on the information I'd provided, successfully enforced the civil judgment and seized the Delaware LLC's assets before they could be moved offshore. Derek did not go quietly. There was a period of several weeks where he was visible in local business media, giving quotes about corporate politics and competitive sabotage, positioning himself as a victim of forces that hadn't appreciated his vision. He was convincing, I'll give him that. He had the kind of confidence that doesn't fully register its own irrelevance. My wife found a position at a small marketing consultancy. Less money, different pace. She moved into an apartment and, as far as I could tell from the occasional mutual friend update I didn't seek out but couldn't entirely avoid, was rebuilding something in a way that was genuinely hers. I didn't wish her badly. I want to be clear about that, but I also didn't feel the absence of her the way I had expected to. I think that, in itself, told me something about the marriage we'd actually had versus the one I'd thought we were living. The divorce was finalized in March. She didn't contest the terms, which I had documented carefully enough that contesting them would only have exposed more of what she'd prefer to remain private. I kept the house. I kept the savings. We structured a fair division of the remaining assets, which was possible because I had made sure they were accurately accounted for. In April, she came to the house unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. I was in the backyard, which I had taken to maintaining more carefully since the divorce. The way people take up physical things when their interior life requires processing. She stood at the gate and I let her in, and we sat in the two old wooden chairs by the garden bed I'd been rebuilding. I want to apologize, she said. Not for what happened between us, because I think we were already somewhere neither of us wanted to admit, but for how I did it. The money. The lying. I listened. I convinced myself that I was protecting myself, she said. That I was being practical. Derek made it sound practical. Derek made a lot of things sound practical, I said. She smiled at that, briefly and without much warmth. He told me you were the kind of man who wouldn't let go, she said. That I needed leverage. That I needed protection. I believed him. And now I know what he is. She looked at the garden. I should have known earlier. I think I did know. I just didn't want to. I thought about that Tuesday night in November. The router alert I had almost not seen. The 2 hours I sat in the home office telling myself there was probably an explanation. We both spent time not seeing things we should have seen, I said. She looked at me with something that I can only describe as recognition, the particular acknowledgement of two people who have known each other a long time and are finally being honest. Are you okay? She asked. I'm better than I expected to be, I said. She left after a little while, and I sat in the backyard in the April light thinking about the question. Whether I was okay. It's an interesting thing to examine from the outside, your own okayness. I had lost something that I built a significant portion of my life around. I had also, somewhere in the process of losing it, found something I'd let atrophy without noticing. The particular clarity that comes from knowing who you are and what you're capable of when something you care about is threatened. Noah called that evening. I told him his mother had stopped by. How was it? He asked. Civil, I said. Honest. That's more than I expected. Me too. Are you good, Dad? I looked out the back window at the garden I was still working on. The beds weren't finished. There was more to do. That seemed right. Yeah, I said. I'm good. A few weeks later, a colleague sent me a referral for a new client, a financial services firm that had been targeted by a sophisticated internal fraud scheme. They needed someone who could map the network activity and build a case thorough enough for criminal prosecution. It was exactly the kind of work I'm best at, finding the pattern, tracing it to its source, making sure the accounting comes out correct. I took the case. I am not a person who believes that everything happens for a reason, or that suffering contains hidden gifts, or any of the comfortable narratives people reach for when their lives break in ways they didn't anticipate. I believe in information and in what you do with it. I believe in the kind of clarity that only comes after something you thought was solid turns out to have been compromised from the inside. I know now what I didn't know a year ago. I know how to look at the things that are right in front of me and see them as they actually are. I know what I will and won't accept, and I know that I am capable of protecting the things that matter to me when they need protecting. That's worth something. I think it might be worth quite a lot. My son is coming home next weekend. I'm planning to finish the garden by then. I want it to look like something that was built on purpose and maintained with intention. The kind of thing that doesn't happen by accident, but by someone paying attention. I think that's the most honest thing I can tell you about where I am now.